August 17th, 1944. Northern France, near the town of Falaise. The air, thick with the metallic scent of burnt cordite and churned earth, hung heavy over the ruins of a landscape that had, until recently, been a serene tapestry of hedgerows and farm fields. The war had moved through here like a scythe. Now, in the aftermath of a vicious engagement, the detritus of modern combat littered the roadside. Among the shell craters and abandoned equipment, a GMC CCKW sat silently, an olive-drab monument to a battle that had already moved on. Its canvas cover was torn by shrapnel, a testament to the sudden violence of its last moments in service. But its engine was still warm. The American convoy it belonged to had been caught in a Luftwaffe strafing run, one of the increasingly rare and desperate occasions when German aircraft managed to claw their way into the skies over Normandy. For the American drivers, it was a terrifying anomaly. For the Germans, a fleeting moment of tactical success in a war that was rapidly turning against them. Now, mechanics from the Wehrmacht's 276th Infantry Division approached the captured vehicle. They moved with a practiced caution, their eyes scanning the tree line, their senses attuned to the lingering dangers of a fluid front line. They circled the American truck, a machine they knew only by its silhouette and the nickname the Americans had given it, the Deuce and a Half. It was massive, a behemoth compared to their own standard transport. At a 2.5-ton rated capacity, it dwarfed the familiar form of the Opel Blitz, the workhorse of the German army. One of the mechanics, a seasoned veteran with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands, called out to his superior, a Hauptfeldwebel, a senior non-commissioned officer. "This one's intact," he shouted, his voice cutting through the unnatural quiet of the afternoon. "Get the Hauptfeldwebel. We should look at this." What they discovered over the next hour and in the weeks that followed would be more than just a technical assessment of an enemy vehicle. It would be a profound and deeply unsettling education in the nature of modern industrial warfare. It would confirm suspicions that had been growing in the minds of thoughtful German soldiers since the Normandy landings, a chilling realization that this war had already been lost. Not on the bloody battlefields of France or the endless steppes of Russia, but in the sprawling, relentless factories of Detroit. This single truck, abandoned on a lonely French road, was a messenger, and it brought with it the undeniable arithmetic of defeat. The German mechanics, men accustomed to the sophisticated and often complex engineering of their own nation's vehicles, began their inspection with a mixture of professional curiosity and ingrained prejudice. They expected to find a crude, perhaps even primitive piece of machinery, a product of a nation they believed lacked Germany's engineering finesse. As they opened the hood, however, their assumptions began to unravel. The 6-cylinder engine sat openly in its compartment, a model of accessibility. Every major component, from the distributor to the carburetor, was positioned for easy access. Parts were clearly, almost condescendingly labeled in English. There was no esoteric complexity, no need for specialized tools just to perform basic checks. One of the mechanics located the toolbox, a simple steel container mounted on the running board. He pried it open. Inside, he found a set of standard wrenches, pliers, a few screwdrivers, and a maintenance manual. He picked up the manual, surprised by its quality. It was printed on heavy, durable paper, designed to withstand the rigors of field use. But it was the contents that truly astonished him. He handed it to the Hauptfeldwebel. The senior NCO flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. "Look at this," he said, his voice low. "Everything is explained with pictures. Detailed illustrations for every procedure. A child could follow these instructions." They had captured American trucks before, of course, but those were often battlefield wrecks, salvaged for spare parts, or hastily pressed into service without a thorough examination. This one was different. It was a complete specimen, a window into the mind of the enemy. The markings on the chassis plate identified it as a 1943 model CCKW 353, the long wheelbase version. Production number stamps indicated it was one of thousands built that year at the Pontiac plant in Michigan. Thousands! From a single factory. The thought was staggering. The first mechanical inspection revealed the core of the American design philosophy. The GMC 270 engine produced a modest 104 horsepower from its 269 cubic inch displacement. By German standards, this was unimpressive. Their own engines were often marvels of high-performance engineering. But the Hauptfeldwebel recognized immediately that peak performance wasn't the goal here. The objective was something else entirely. Every bolt head on the engine block seemed to be the same size. Every nut could be turned with the same standard wrench found in the toolbox. The spark plugs were positioned in the open, not buried under a labyrinth of pipes and wires. The oil filter was a simple canister that could be changed by hand without any tools at all. "This is designed for idiots," one of the younger mechanics muttered, a note of derision in his voice. The Hauptfeldwebel corrected him, his tone sharp. "No," he said, not looking up from the engine bay. "It's not designed for idiots. It's designed for an army of millions, where most men are not mechanics. It is designed for farm boys from Iowa and factory workers from Pennsylvania who will be taught to drive and maintain this machine with minimal training. This is brilliant." He was right. The GMC CKW was not engineered for perfection. It was engineered for the reality of a conscript army. It was a machine built for a nation that could draw upon a manpower with a high degree of innate mechanical literacy. Men who had grown up tinkering with tractors and automobiles and possessed the practical skills to keep vehicles running. The designers had leveraged this national trait, creating a truck that was forgiving, intuitive, and robust. Every component had been selected not for its cutting-edge technology, but for its availability and ease of replacement. There was nothing exotic, nothing that required specialized knowledge or equipment. They moved their attention to the chassis and drivetrain. They examined the six-wheel drive system, a feature that immediately set it apart from the vast majority of their own trucks. A simple, rugged transfer case engaged the front axle with a single lever inside the cab. It was a straightforward, almost brutish design, but its purpose was undeniable: to provide traction in the harshest conditions. They thought of their own Opel Blitz trucks. Reliable and well-built, they were nevertheless primarily rear-wheel drive vehicles. They struggled constantly in the thick mud of the Eastern Front and the rain-soaked fields of France, requiring careful, experienced driving to avoid getting stuck. This American truck, with power going to all 6 wheels, could simply muscle its way through terrain that would immobilize their own logistics columns. The suspension system was another revelation. It used basic leaf springs, a design that was decades old. They were crude, certainly, but they were also nearly unbreakable. The Hauptfeldwebel thought of the sophisticated torsion bar suspension used on some of their own advanced vehicles. It was beautiful engineering, a testament to German technical prowess, but it required factory-level tools and expertise to repair. These American leaf springs, he noted grimly, could be hammered straight with a rock if necessary. They could be repaired in the field by an ordinary soldier with the basic tools provided in the running board toolbox. But the most troubling discovery was what the numbers on the frame revealed. The stamp read Pontiac Plant Number 1. The serial number, when cross-referenced with known intelligence, indicated that this specific truck was one of approximately 150,000 built in 1943 alone. The men fell silent as the implication of that number settled over them. 150,000 from one plant in 1 year. It was a figure that defied comprehension. It was more trucks in a single class than Germany had produced across all categories combined in the same year. In 1943, Germany's entire industrial output, serving both military and essential civilian needs, amounted to approximately 100,000 trucks. The United States, by contrast, had produced 620,000, almost all of them for military use. One of the mechanics, a man who had been a bookkeeper before the war, did the math in his head. If one American plant produces this many, he asked quietly, how many plants do they have? The answer was a terrifying secret that was just beginning to dawn on the German high command. Dozens. GMC, Chevrolet, Studebaker, REO, International Harvester, Dodge, Ford, all churning out similar vehicles to standardized military specifications. And thanks to a doctrine of interchangeability, many of their parts were interchangeable. The scale was not just industrial, it was continental. That evening, the unit's supply officer, an Oberleutnant who had worked in the Opel plant in Brandenburg before the war, joined the inspection. He understood automotive manufacturing on a deep, structural level. He listened to the mechanic's findings, nodding slowly, his face grim in the fading light. "We are looking at this all wrong," he said, running a hand over the stamped steel fender. "We see a simple truck, but what this represents is an entire manufacturing philosophy that we cannot hope to match." He began to explain what the GMC revealed about American production. The stamped steel body panels were crude by German standards, lacking the precise finish they valued. But they could be produced in vast quantities by any press shop in the country. The wooden cargo bed, a feature that had initially struck the mechanics as primitive, was in fact a shrewd adaptation. Introduced on later models, it conserved precious steel and used standard lumber that any sawmill could provide. The canvas top was made from common commercial fabric. Nothing was specialized. Everything was abundant. "Look at the chassis," he continued, pointing his flashlight at the ladder frame. "Straight-channel steel welded together. Any structural steel plant in America could produce these by the mile. Compare that to our Opel, with its precisely formed frame rails that require specialized dies and complex machinery." The Americans had designed for their strength, massive, overwhelming industrial capacity. The GMC CCKW wasn't superior to the Opel Blitz in terms of engineering elegance or technological sophistication, but it was profoundly superior in the one metric that mattered in a war of attrition. The supply officer's assessment grew darker as he spoke. "In 1943, we produced approximately 23,000 Opel Blitz trucks at Brandenburg. The Americans probably built 20 times that number of this one model alone. And this is just one truck type from one manufacturer." He was, in fact, understating the case. American factories would ultimately produce over 562,000 CCKW trucks during the war. Germany's entire wartime production of the Opel Blitz, the absolute backbone of Wehrmacht's logistics, totaled perhaps 150,000 units, most of them being the 4x2 version that lacked the GMC's critical all-wheel drive capability. Over the next week, the 276th Infantry Division pressed the captured GMC into service for their own supply runs. The truck was a revelation. It transformed their capabilities. Where their own Opel trucks bogged down and struggled through muddy farm roads, the GMC simply powered through, its 6 wheels churning the earth with relentless determination. When they loaded it far beyond its rated capacity, something that happened constantly in the desperate reality of a retreating army, it continued to function without complaint. The 6-wheel drive provided a level of traction and mobility that their rear-wheel drive vehicles simply could not match. A supply sergeant who drove it daily offered his own blunt assessment. "This truck is reliable in a way our vehicles are not," he told the Hauptfeldwebel. "It's not that it's better built, it's that it's built expecting abuse. They designed it knowing that soldiers would overload it, neglect maintenance, and drive it like they are trying to destroy it." That was the final crystallizing realization. The American engineers had designed the GMC for the chaotic reality of war, not the pristine theory of it. They assumed their drivers would be poorly trained. They assumed maintenance would be delayed or performed incorrectly. They assumed operating conditions would be abysmal. And so they built accordingly, simple, robust, and forgiving. On August 25, 1944, the very same day the Allies officially launched the Red Ball Express, the 276th Infantry Division received orders to withdraw eastward toward the German border. As they prepared to move, they witnessed something that completed their education in American logistics. On a parallel road, an American convoy was moving up to the front. It was not a tactical movement of a combat unit, but a pure supply column. The watching Germans, accustomed to their own sparse and often horse-drawn supply trains, stood in stunned silence. They started counting the vehicles as they rolled past, a seemingly endless river of olive-drab steel. After half an hour, they gave up. Truck after truck after truck, stretching to the horizon in both directions. GMC CCKW trucks predominated, all identical, all loaded with fuel, ammunition, and rations, all moving with a mechanical precision that spoke of an inexhaustible source. "Where are their horses?" a young soldier, barely 18, asked with genuine confusion. The Hauptfeldwebel looked at the boy and realized he had never seen a fully motorized army before. In the Wehrmacht, 80% of all logistical movement still relied on horses. 2/3 of their vehicles were pulled by animals. Their own division required over 5,000 horses to move its supplies and pull its artillery. Those horses needed food, water, rest, and veterinary care. They could march perhaps 30 kilometers a day in good conditions. They died by the thousands in the Russian winter. American divisions had no horses. They had trucks. Thousands of trucks that could move hundreds of kilometers per day, required no fodder, didn't tire, and didn't freeze to death. A single American infantry division possessed more trucks than an entire German Army Corps. The supply officer did more calculations that night by the dim light of a kerosene lamp. Each American division has approximately 2,000 trucks, he said to the assembled officers. They have 40 divisions in France. That is 80,000 trucks supporting combat operations alone, not even counting the higher-level supply services. We have maybe 100,000 trucks spread across all fronts, from Norway to Italy. And we have 2.75 million horses. The numbers were obscene. They were fighting against an enemy that had simply abolished the physical constraints that had defined warfare for centuries. Someone asked the obvious question: how can they produce so many vehicles? The answer was painful for the proud German officers to articulate. American automotive plants had been designed for mass production on a colossal scale long before the war. Henry Ford's assembly line, General Motors' production systems, these were not wartime innovations. They were the very foundation of the American economy. When war came, they simply converted that immense civilian production capacity to military needs. The transition was seamless because the manufacturing philosophy was identical: standardization, interchangeability, and mass production. The same factories that built Chevrolet sedans for American families were now building GMC trucks for the Army. The same workers who assembled Oldsmobiles now assembled military vehicles. Germany had excellent engineers, perhaps the best in the world, but it lacked this fundamental production infrastructure. The Opel plant in Brandenburg, even at its peak, was a small, almost artisanal workshop compared to a single American automotive complex like the Ford River Rouge plant. And America had dozens of such complexes. By September 1944, the unit had captured 3 more GMC trucks and a Dodge WC-63, a smaller but equally robust 3/4-ton truck. As the mechanics began servicing this small captured fleet, they discovered something even more remarkable. The parts were interchangeable, not just between identical GMC trucks, but between vehicles from different manufacturers. A carburetor from a GMC fit the Dodge. Electrical components like starters and generators were standardized. Even the tires were the same size. They have standardized their entire vehicle fleet, the supply officer explained, his voice filled with a kind of professional awe. This was the fruit of a deliberate pre-war doctrine established by the U.S. Army's Quartermaster Corps. Having learned the painful lesson of logistical chaos during World War I, where a menagerie of different commercial vehicles required an astonishing 445,000 separate line items of spare parts, the Americans had been determined not to repeat the mistake. They established standardized payload classes and demanded a high degree of parts commonality. The Dodge WC series, for example, was designed to maintain 80% service parts interchangeability between its earlier half-ton and later 3/4-ton models. The result was a logistical system of unparalleled efficiency. One set of specifications, multiple manufacturers, the officer continued. It means any mechanic can service any truck. Any parts depot can supply any vehicle. Their logistics are unified in a way ours have never been. The contrast with their own situation was stark. The Wehrmacht used vehicles from dozens of different manufacturers, both German and captured, with almost no parts compatibility. A mechanic trained on an Opel couldn't necessarily service a Borgward or a Mercedes. Parts warehouses had to stock an impossible array of components for hundreds of different vehicle types. Divisions sometimes operated as many as 162 different types of soft-skin vehicles. It was a logistical nightmare, a self-inflicted wound that bled their army of its strength. Germany's own attempt at a standardized truck, the Einheits LKW, had been a failure, with fewer than 15,000 units produced. They had recognized the problem, but lacked the industrial culture to solve it. On October 3, 1944, the division's remaining vehicles ground to a halt, stranded when fuel supplies failed to arrive. The horses could forage in the fields, but the trucks sat immobile, useless monuments of steel. Meanwhile, American operations continued unabated. Their supply network, a vast conveyor belt built on hundreds of thousands of GMC trucks, delivering fuel reliably to the most forward units. The mechanics spent their enforced idleness studying the captured American trucks. One of them, while cleaning a greasy part, made an observation that crystallized their entire painful education. "We designed our vehicles to be good," he said slowly. "They designed theirs to be good enough, but in overwhelming numbers. In total war, that wins." The Hauptfeldwebel wrote a detailed technical report on the GMC CCKW. He documented every aspect, the standardized components, the simple maintenance procedures, the robust construction that sacrificed elegance for durability. The report noted that while the Opel Blitz was superior in certain metrics like fuel efficiency and maneuverability on paved roads, these advantages were rendered meaningless when Germany could only produce one truck for every 20 the Americans built of this single model. The report concluded, American vehicle production represents an industrial capacity we cannot match. Their manufacturing philosophy prioritizes quantity and standardization over individual vehicle perfection. In a sustained war of attrition, this approach has proven devastatingly effective. Similar reports were flooding Wehrmacht headquarters from every front. German intelligence analysts compiled American production statistics with growing alarm, numbers they had once dismissed as brazen propaganda. The figures were staggering. American factories would produce nearly 2.4 million trucks during the war. Of those, over 812,000 were in the 2.5-ton class alone. Germany, Italy, and Japan could not approach that total. The 427,284 trucks the U.S. sent to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease alone exceeded Germany's entire wartime truck production. As Joseph Stalin himself would admit, without the use of those machines, we would lose this war. December 1944 brought the Ardennes offensive, Hitler's last great gamble in the West. It was an operation born of desperation, and its logistics plan was a reflection of that reality. The plan relied heavily, explicitly, on capturing American fuel supplies, because Germany lacked sufficient fuel reserves to sustain the offensive on its own. German soldiers were ordered to use captured American vehicles whenever possible, because their own logistics system could not keep pace. The Panzer Lehr Division, for instance, which was short 70% of its authorized vehicles, captured and immediately put into service some 120 American Jeeps and more than 150 trucks. The irony was bitter and absolute. Germany's last major offensive was entirely dependent on capturing the very vehicles and fuel that symbolized why Germany was losing the war. The 276th Infantry Division participated in the offensive, their small collection of captured American trucks serving alongside their few remaining Opel vehicles. When the offensive inevitably stalled and then collapsed, it wasn't primarily because of American tactical resistance, though that was fierce. It was because German logistics completely disintegrated. The entire plan was unwinnable from the start. Most units began the attack with only enough fuel to move 50 to 125 kilometers, far short of their objectives. The spearhead of the attack, Comp Group Piper, ran out of fuel just miles from a massive American depot, which was set ablaze before it could be captured. When Piper's abandoned tanks were recovered later, 80% were found to be fully operational, but out of gas. Panzer divisions abandoned their irreplaceable tanks when fuel trucks couldn't reach them. Infantry units, intended to be motorized, resorted to horse-drawn wagons because their transport had either broken down or run out of fuel. The Seventh Army, tasked with protecting the southern flank, had been so thoroughly demotorized due to fuel shortages that it relied on horses and bicycles, unable to move fast enough to prevent Patton's relief of Bastogne. Meanwhile, American supply operations, though initially surprised, continued with a brutal mechanical efficiency. The Red Ball Express had ended in November, but American logistics now flowed from the captured ports of Antwerp and Cherbourg. Trucks moved supplies on routes that became more efficient by the day as engineers rebuilt the French infrastructure. The American Army was a machine, fed by an industry operating on a scale Germany had never achieved and could no longer comprehend. In January 1945, as the remnants of the German forces retreated from the Ardennes, the captured GMC trucks proved their worth yet again. They still ran. The Opel trucks, subjected to the same harsh winter conditions and battlefield abuse, had mostly broken down. Their precise engineering unable to tolerate the neglect and punishment of a collapsing front. The difference was not maintenance. It was design philosophy. The GMC was built to absorb punishment. The Opel was built to German standards of precision that shattered under the strain of total war. By March 1945, the 276th Infantry Division was a shattered remnant, defending hopeless positions in the Rhineland as American forces crossed the Rhine in overwhelming strength. The mechanics watched American supply operations with a kind of despairing professional admiration. They have built an army that runs on logistics, and they have built a logistics system that cannot be stopped, the Hauptfeldwebel observed to his supply officer. Our army was built assuming we would fight short, victorious campaigns, where tactical excellence would overcome material disadvantages. We never planned for this. Years of sustained combat against an enemy that produces equipment faster than we can destroy it. The division surrendered on April 18, 1945. The mechanics, along with thousands of other defeated German soldiers, became prisoners of war. They were loaded onto trucks for transport to processing centers. The trucks were American GMCs. The journey provided a final, immersive education in American industrial capacity. At the processing center near Koblenz, they saw motor pools filled with hundreds upon hundreds of American trucks. Young American soldiers, GIs with only a few weeks of training, serviced them with a casual efficiency that would have been impossible in the Wehrmacht, where master mechanics were required for complex jobs. Parts were abundant, stacked in crates. Tools were readily available. Maintenance manuals, with their simple illustrations, made every soldier a potential mechanic. One of the German mechanics, who spoke some English, struck up a conversation with an American motor pool sergeant. The sergeant, a friendly man from Ohio, was surprisingly unguarded. "Your mechanics?" he asked. "Hell, we always need mechanics. Can you work on these?" He gestured at the rows of GMC trucks. "Yes," the German replied. "We maintained several captured ones." "Good. The war's over for you guys, but these trucks still need maintenance. I can get you assigned to the motor pool. It's better than sitting behind wire." Over the following weeks, the German mechanics worked alongside American soldiers, maintaining the very vehicles that had helped defeat them. The American sergeant was happy to explain their maintenance philosophy. "We design everything for speed," he said, slapping the fender of a CCKW. "Quick maintenance, common parts, simple procedures. See this engine? A two-man team can do a complete overhaul in 8 hours using only the tools in their field kit. Try doing that with one of your trucks." The German mechanic acknowledged the truth. An Opel engine overhaul requires factory conditions and specialized equipment. We designed for precision. You designed for practicality. "Exactly," the sergeant grinned. "In peacetime, your way probably produces better vehicles. In war, our way produces vehicles that keep armies moving. How many of these GMCs you think we built?" "I don't know. Hundreds of thousands?" "Over 500,000 of just this model," the American said. "Then there's the Dodges, the Studebakers, the Internationals. Millions of trucks total. That's what won the war. Not better tanks or better soldiers, just more equipment than you could ever hope to destroy." He continued, warming to his subject. "You know what's funny? These trucks aren't that complicated. We used commercial truck technology, barely modified it for military use. The engine's a commercial design, the transmission's commercial. We just made it rugged and produced it in massive, massive quantities." This was the lesson the German mechanics absorbed completely. America had won through its industrial philosophy as much as its industrial capacity. They had designed for mass production from the very start, standardized ruthlessly, prioritized reliability over sophistication, and built supply chains that could sustain operations indefinitely. The mechanics spent months in the prisoner camps, many of them working in American motor pools. They witnessed the scale of American logistics daily. Convoys of hundreds of trucks moved supplies across occupied Germany. Repair depots contained more spare parts than entire German divisions had possessed during the war. They saw production systems so efficient that damaged vehicles were often simply replaced rather than repaired, because new vehicles arrived from the ports faster than major repairs could be completed. In late 1945, as repatriation began, the German mechanics returned to a devastated homeland. Cities were rubble, factories were destroyed. But everywhere there were American vehicles. GMC trucks hauled reconstruction materials. Jeeps carried occupation forces. The American military machine was now rebuilding the country it had defeated. The Hauptfeldwebel, now just a civilian, found work at a reconstruction depot in Frankfurt. His experience with American vehicles made him a valuable asset. One day, while training young Germans in vehicle maintenance, he reflected on what the war had taught him. "Before the war," he said, gesturing to a row of GMCs, "we believed German engineering was superior. We believed quality would always over quantity. We were wrong. The Americans understood modern industrial warfare better than we did. They built adequate equipment in overwhelming numbers. They standardized ruthlessly. They designed for the army they had, millions of ordinary men, not the army of elite specialists we wished we had. He patted the hood of a truck. These trucks are not masterpieces of engineering, but they won the war because there were hundreds of thousands of them. They all used the same parts. Any soldier could drive them, and any mechanic could fix them. That was the genius. Not in the individual vehicle, but in the system that produced and sustained them. By 1947, the Marshall Plan was delivering aid to Germany, transported primarily in American trucks. German mechanics maintained these vehicles, applying the lessons they had learned. When German industry began to rebuild, many engineers incorporated the American principles they had observed: standardization, component commonality, and design for manufacturability. Companies like Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and a rebuilt Volkswagen would eventually merge German engineering precision with American mass production techniques, creating a new industrial powerhouse. The GMC CCKW remained in American service until the 1960s, a testament to its robust and practical design. The Opel Blitz, though an excellent vehicle in its own right, became a symbol of Germany's fatal industrial shortcomings. In a 1967 interview for an automotive journal, one of the former Wehrmacht mechanics, now a respected consultant, summarized the lesson of the war. The GMC truck taught us that in modern warfare, perfection is the enemy of good enough, he said. Germany designed beautiful vehicles that were too complex to produce in the necessary quantities and too sophisticated for field maintenance. America designed adequate vehicles that could be produced by the millions and maintained by anyone. He concluded with a thought that had been forged in the mud of Normandy and the despair of the POW camps. We did not lose because our engineers were inferior. We lost because our leaders fundamentally misunderstood what industrial warfare required. German intelligence had eventually come to the same terrible conclusion. In 1943, after cross-referencing captured American supply documents with their own production figures, the analysts in Berlin reported that Germany was not merely fighting an enemy army. They were, in their own words, fighting against arithmetic itself. And arithmetic always wins. The story of the Wehrmacht mechanics and the GMC truck is ultimately a story of learning through defeat. They had believed in German superiority, in precision over quantity, in engineering perfection over mass production. The simple, abundant, and endlessly reliable American trucks taught them otherwise. That knowledge, painful in its acquisition, became invaluable in reconstruction, helping to transform Germany from a defeated enemy into a prosperous ally, built on the hard lessons learned from the thousands of olive-drab trucks that had rolled unstoppably across the battlefields of Europe.